Hi, I'm Shane.
And I'm Alex.
And this is the RPM Podcast.
Thank you very much for joining us for the post-race podcast. And what a treat we got from Monza. Once again, another historic victory. But this time it was Daniel Ricciardo who sealed it for McLaren in Italy. And again, the sprint race was overshadowed by a dramatic Sunday, including an incident between Hamilton and Verstappen, just like at Silverstone, where we got our last sprint qualifying. I'm wearing my McLaren colours again today. I was wearing them in the previous podcast, and it wasn't deliberate. It was because it was really, really hot. You remember, Shane, we recorded, and it was absolutely boiling. And, the good thing about this top is it's light and breathable. And today I'm wearing it on purpose to show the McLaren colours. Back, baby. Anyway, we'll get to that. There's lots of exciting things to talk about today, so I don't want to waste any more time. Let's get going.
Right, so let's dive straight into our talking points. And it's only fair that we mention, like you already have done, that this weekend was the second sprint qualifying race weekend, which up until about 2 minutes ago, I completely forgot about. How underwhelming was that race compared to the full feature race on Sunday? So let's take it back to Friday, where we had practice one and then qualifying. Qualifying was quite interesting. Last week we saw Red Bull on top quite dominantly by Max Verstappen, and this week it was all Mercedes. It looks like it was going to be Mercedes weekend. Valtteri Bottas and Lewis Hamilton topping both topping qualifying, with Max Verstappen following shortly behind. So it was almost like the ball was in Mercedes' court for the whole weekend. It was theirs to lose. What did you make of the qualifying session?
It was a little bit more procedural, I suppose, aside from Bottas being on pole, which I thought was interesting. He was the one giving a tow to Hamilton, but he had a very, very solid lap. I'm not sure that there's some talk about the driver transfer and how Bottas seems like a new man ever since it's been announced that he's going to Alfa Romeo. I'm not sure I see that, because he's always been pretty chill in interviews and been pretty relaxed, and he's got that kind of dry Finnish sense of humor. And the man's still capable of pole every now and again. Like, he gets pole once, and I guess it's easy to kind of read into that. But anyway, he had a great lap, and he's always been pretty close to Hamilton here at Italy. I know technically it isn't pole because of the sprint qualifying, but I don't care. I'm calling it that because that's what it should be. Other interesting things from qualifying. Ricciardo was encouragingly close to Norris, which was nice. And it's good to see after that summer break, he seems to have really kind of switched on a bit, made a bit more sense of the car, which is great. Obviously, we know that he went on to win the race, but at the time we were watching it in qualifying and I'm thinking, this is good. Like, this is what I expected, a bit more of an actual competition between the two of them. But otherwise, I thought it was a pretty familiar story overall. Another really good lap from Giovinazzi and from Gasly, who both were really shining in their respective machinery. Perez was a bit underwhelming again, and really kind of wasn't where I think Red Bull think he probably should be. The only surprise, I think, was probably Williams were looking a bit off the pace on Saturday. Mr. Saturday himself wasn't quite able to pull anything off all that spectacular, but they found a bit more pace in the race at least. But otherwise, I thought it was fairly straightforward.
Yeah, like you said, fairly straightforward, but just Mercedes on top of the timing sheets instead of Red Bull. And this was the first time we've got... No, sorry, ignore that statistic. That statistic will come out later on. But it's funny you mentioned Perez having another abysmal qualifying session. How many times will we have the same conversation on this podcast? It always seems to start with Gasly's done exceedingly well in the AlphaTauri, and Sergio Perez hasn't quite done what he's needed to do and put that Red Bull up in the top 5 where it should be.
Yeah, it's very, very strange that he should be outperformed by the supposed B team. I know they say that they're not a B team now, and they want to be a sister team, but yeah, one of them is vying for the championship in that car, and the other one is qualifying P9. So it's
exactly
still a few question marks over that, and I think that battle of the wingmen that we talked about before, I remember us having that conversation a few times. It keeps kind of swinging one way and the next, and this was definitely Bottas's week in that regard. Should we move on to the sprint qualifying then?
Yeah, I was just about to say, not to worry, because no points were awarded on Friday this week, but Saturday there were points up for grabs for another sprint race, which I managed to sit down and watch. And it felt like it went by very quick, and it was very procedural. I thought it was less interesting than Silverstone. Comparing to Silverstone, which one did you prefer?
I found them both pretty underwhelming, to be honest with you. It's not that it doesn't impact the race, because obviously it does to some extent, and it just feels a bit too insubstantial. And much like the British Grand Prix, we got a few laps of excitement, and then the remaining 12 or so, we were just sort of waiting for the end. Bottas did very well off the line, but I never really felt like there was ever going to be much of a battle happening with Verstappen because, of course, Bottas doesn't really have much to lose and also not a whole lot to gain either, other than 3 points, which is not going to make a huge difference in his place in the standings. And Verstappen doesn't need to fight. He just needs to keep it clean, stay in P2, and he knows that because of Bottas's engine penalty, he's going to be starting at the front of the grid. There was kind of nothing really going on there. The only battle I think we really saw was Hamilton on Norris. And that was a great little battle for a little while as Hamilton was trying to get past. That was really the only big action that I can really think of that would constitute, real sort of racing between two cars.
Yeah, I think the majority of the grid stayed the same. Hamilton dropped down a couple of places, which is uncharacteristic for him.
He had a poor start,
usually gets had a very poor start, and that's not. He kind of just got swamped, and he looked at the onboard replay. He went to go defend to the left, and then he thought, well, that's a lost cause, so I'll defend to the right. And then Norris got past him. And I think he just felt like he was in no man's land, and cars were flying left, right, and centre. But going back down the grid, you got Pierre Gasly, who qualified officially on Friday in 6th, and then DNF during the sprint race because he knocked off his front wing or damaged his front wing going into the first chicane. And then obviously you've got that high speed right hander, and everyone saw it on the helicopter cam, this wing dragging on the floor, sparking quite impressively. But like we've seen before, as soon as that wing gets dislodged and goes under the front of the car, you're a passenger. And that's all what happened. It went underneath the car. Luckily there was gravel, because that slowed his car down quite a bit. If that had been traditional runoff by just tarmac or abrasive ground, that would have been a huge impact. What did you make of that?
It's an almost exact repeat of what happened in Bahrain, isn't it? Because it was it was also Ricciardo then that he clipped on the rear as well. And he's hit Ricciardo again here on the back and wiped out his front wing. It's a shame, but he's only got himself to blame, really. I think he just should have been a little bit more cautious going into the Rettifilio. And then when he's at the Curva Grande, like you said, sure, maybe he genuinely didn't see. You think he'd noticed that his front wing is kind of hanging off, and he tries to go for the corner anyway, and he just ended up in the wall. So a shame, but that's just another bit of a misstep for Pierre when really he should have been capitalising. And to go out on lap 1, it was an awful weekend for AlphaTauri considering what happened.
It really was.
Last weekend. I think that they got only a handful of laps in and both cars were out. So
yeah, Daniel Ricciardo was quite lucky, given the impact of the front wing was big enough to damage it and knock it off its pivot point. I'm surprised Daniel didn't get a rear puncture. I was quite concerned when I saw that he qualified so well. And after I saw that impact, I thought, please don't be a slow puncher, because as soon as you have a pit stop in this race, it's game over. Like, you'll be starting from the back of the grid. You might as well retire and save the engine. But luckily for everyone involved, Daniel did not get a puncture, and beautiful things went on to happen later on in the race weekend. Shall we move on to the race? Should we move on to the good stuff?
I was gonna add just a couple of small things for sprint qualifying. I know I want to talk about sprint qualifying. Very, very strange indeed.
You have to say
it's there was a couple of interesting little bits. Like we discovered why, and I've always wondered this. We discovered why there's no DRS zone after Ascari. So I've always wondered why they don't just add another DRS zone there, because it's a really long straight. It's another possible overtaking opportunity. But apparently the drivers generally don't brake before the parabolica, and thus there's no mechanism to close the rear wing, because it's when they hit the brake that the flap closes. So that's why there's no DRS zone there. I didn't know that until they mentioned it on the broadcast, which is interesting.
Yeah, neither did I, and I found it more interesting that they don't brake into that corner. They might let off a little bit, but 9 times out of 10 they're flat out, which I think is just crazy when you look at the speeds they're doing and the G's they're pulling, because, well, a modern Formula 1 car, look what it can do. Absolutely crazy.
Well, speaking of the Parabolica as well, they have apparently renamed it as well.
Yes,
it's
they
not
have.
the Parabolica, it's it's Alboreto, after Michele Alboreto, who raced for Ferrari in F1 from 84 to 88. I think it's in my notes somewhere. I'll double check that. But yeah, it's been named after him, but everyone still kept calling it Parabolica. And
Yes, that's what I noticed.
it's going to be pretty hard to shake that. So they've decided to rename that there. Daniel Ricciardo starting on the front row of the grid for the first time since Mexico 2018, where he was on pole. And it was also, we got a little bit of FIA, a little bit of Red Bull to Michael Massey. And it's a bit of a PR disaster waiting to happen, really. They don't half sound like whingers when they go into Michael Massey. When he said something like, we need some time to work out if giving the place back is the right thing to do. You remember when Perez wouldn't give the place back? I mean, it seemed pretty open and shut to me. He went past him off the track. How much time do you need to figure it out? But those FIA radios to the stewards, between the stewards and the teams, there's something very unbecoming about those videos hearing him whinge to Michael Massey. In a way, it's a bit of fun to hear it, and on the other hand, I can't help but cringe and think, like, do you guys realize you're on an international broadcast? And it's the equivalent of complaining to the teacher, like, miss, you hit me. That's what it feels like. Last little bit for sprint qualifying. Saw an interesting idea on Twitter, and it was that Pirelli could make a tyre just for the sprint qualifying that everyone uses, where all the drivers can push hard and not have to manage them, and they all get that one tyre for the sprint, which is an intriguing idea, because if they really must insist on having these sprint qualifyings, I don't really care for them. I could do without them, to be honest. But if they really insist on having them, they could at least give the drivers the opportunity to push like hell for those laps and not have them worry about tyres and the like. So that's a possible sort of addition to that format.
Because some drivers started sprint qualifying on soft tyres and others started on medium tyres, which I think after the Perez incident, not after the Perez incident, after the Gasly incident, we had a safety car for a couple of laps. Those who were on soft tyres really benefited because you weren't wearing your tyres as much as you would do at normal race pace. So they kept their longevity throughout the whole of the sprint instead of those soft tyres dropping off towards the end. Because I know both McLaren drivers, Lando and Daniel, were worried that towards the end of the sprint qualifying, their pace would completely drop off because they both started on the soft tyres, whereas others around them were on the mediums. And they thought they might be swamped towards the end. But luckily, that safety car really played into the hands of those on the soft. But if we did have one standalone tyre, maybe a little bit more resistant, more resilient than the soft tyre, but less abrasive than the medium, then that could be quite good. I quite like the sound of that. And everyone just starts on the same tyre.
Yeah, surely Pirelli could engineer something that's specifically for that format. It might help.
We already have
interesting idea.
5 dry compounds, just for 5 dry tyre compounds, I believe. C1 to C5, and then 2, obviously one intermediate and 1 wet. So at one point we had ultra soft, super soft, soft, medium, hard. I'm not sure if there was an ultra hard or anything like that.
There was a hyper soft at one point.
There was a hyper soft. Yeah, it was. It was the purple or pink rimmed. I can't remember.
It was like a sort of baby pink, wasn't it?
So I'm sure it wouldn't be too difficult to magic up another tyre. Yes, another tyre. A 1 lap tyre, that's all it was, wasn't it? But yeah, that's not a bad idea, actually.
Let's go to the race then. Let's get to the big event. What do you want to talk about first, Shane?
I wanted to talk about Antonio Giovinazzi and how actually since the summer break he's almost turned a leaf, hasn't he? He's turned a corner. I feel like he knows his seat is up for grabs. It's one of the very few seats on the grid which hasn't been confirmed for the 2022 season. And fair play to him, coming out of the summer break, he's qualified in the top 10 twice out of 3 races, which is actually a huge difference compared to what he was doing beforehand. So we've, praised him before. We mentioned it during the race that Antonio's done quite well again to put it into Q3. Alfa Romeo seem very happy about it because it's all they're tweeting about at the moment. But unfortunately, it all goes down the pan. Let me talk you through what happened. Well, you obviously know, but for those audio listeners who haven't watched the race. So Antonio goes deep into turn 4, which is the second chicane on the track. He realizes he's not going to make the corner. So he goes wide and cuts the corner instead. A very important decision for those who, aren't going to make corners later on in the race and maybe should just go off and cut the corner instead. But he chose to cut the corner and rejoin the track. Whilst rejoining the track, he clearly didn't realise that on the left-hand side, Carlos Sainz in the Ferrari is there. And the pair touch. Carlos seems to get off absolutely fine, but Antonio comes off far worse and goes into the barrier, losing his front wing. And I was just about to say, it's a real shame for Antonio. And I know it's his fault. I appreciate it's his fault. It was an unsafe release. Not unsafe release. It was an unsafe joining of the track, which I think is a dangerous re-entry. That's what it's classified as.
Something like that,
But it seems like he's been working really hard the last couple of weeks to put that car into Q3. Like I mentioned, he's done it twice. And he's just thrown it all down the pan in the matter of a couple of corners. It's really undone that stellar qualifying performance he's put together in the last couple of weeks.
You can see on the onboard that he's looking in his right-hand mirror as he's coming onto the track, so he just doesn't see Sainz at all. Yeah, totally his fault. It's a shame.
Do you think this will affect his chances for next year? His seat chances for next year?
Yeah, I think that this incident might play a decent part in the Italian having scuppered his chances, which is a shame. When we first started talking about Giovinazzi in F1, I think we both said something along the lines of that he's like the most anonymous driver on the grid. It's like the one driver you sort of forget about when you're thinking about who are all the drivers. But he has very slowly clawed his way up towards some decent results, and his teammate, has been Kimi Räikkönen. So that itself has got to be a reasonable challenge when you're being compared to a world champion, and his qualifying performances especially have improved. And when, like you mentioned, he's been doing really well recently. When you consider the machinery that he's got, that's absolutely fantastic what he's been doing. Then, when Russell gets into Q3, he is rightly fully praised for it. And I think Giovinazzi deserves equal praise considering the machinery that he's working with. But he's just not quite got that consistency there. He has been unlucky as well, but on this incident, it was his own fault.
His fault.
And I think doing it at the Italian Grand Prix as well, it's that's going to play on the minds of whoever's making that decision, I think. And
also he hits a Ferrari. It couldn't have been a worse set of circumstances at the Italian Grand Prix, and he hits a Ferrari, and I think Carlos got away with it pretty well. I don't think he had any damage at all, or didn't have to box for a fresh set of tyres. But yeah, pretty bad set of circumstances for Giovinazzi right there.
Who might end up in that seat instead?
I don't know. I think there's a lot of, and I don't follow Formula 2 too closely, so correct me if I'm wrong, but from what I hear, there's a lot of people, there's a lot of names floating around, up to 6 or 7 names floating around, which could have that seat. It's whether do they need a pay driver? Do they need the money? I don't know. They've got Bottas coming in. I really don't know. Do you follow Formula 2 at all? Look at the driver transfer market. Are you any more clued up?
I sort of watch the highlights of the races occasionally, and I keep a cursory glance at it. I don't really follow it that deeply. I do know that obviously there's talk of Zhou coming in, who has a lot of money with him. But isn't Callum Ilott there?
I think he's there, but I do believe that's where the money side of things come into play, because he hasn't got the financial backing other drivers do have, but he's arguably got a better CV. So it's a real tricky decision.
Another possibility, and for a lot of these drivers, Schumacher.
Yes, I did. I think I mentioned that last week, didn't I? When we announced, or on the RPM roundup, I mentioned that seat could go to Schumacher, which actually isn't a bad shout. Not only because I mentioned it last week, but after the race has had this week, and another incident between the two drivers, Schumacher might just up and leave, or we'll quite happily take an offer from somewhere else. But we'll talk about that later on.
Anywhere that's not Haas at the moment might be a bit better for him. But yeah, that's Giovinazzi. I'll go next then, and I think we should probably. I wanna save the fun stuff for later on, so we end on a high note. So I think now is probably a good time to jump into this big incident, the Lewis and Max incident.
Before you do that, do you want to talk about the pit stops first, because they were a massive part of
what led up? it's hard not to mention this without also talking about, like you say, the build up to it, because it's lap 26 where the actual incident takes place, but it is a few laps before that Verstappen pits, and it's a terrible stop, absolutely awful. 11.1 seconds. Apparently, it's something to do with the OK button on the wheel gun either not being pressed or something going wrong with it or whatever. So everything was done. He was ready to go, but the light didn't turn green, so he didn't go. Yeah, awful stop. Very uncharacteristic for Red Bull at such a key moment as well. So that is already going to affect Max's mentality here, because he's going to be pretty annoyed that he was in a good position and now he's, he was way back. He must have come out in, I think he must have come out in like 7th or 8th or something like that. It was pretty bad. Likewise, Hamilton had boxed shortly after and had also had a pretty slow stop as well. It was about 4.2 seconds. Not as bad as Max's, but not really great either. So those two pit stops and how slow they were just magically happened to have it so that when Hamilton was coming out of the pits, there was Verstappen. Verstappen was chasing. And Hamilton is coming out of the pits. There's a blue flag waving, which a couple of people have mentioned. I think that's just a precautionary measure for when people come out of the pits and there's faster cars approaching.
Yes.
It doesn't mean you've got to give up a place. But blue flags don't mean you've got to give up a place or anything like that, because even when you're being lapped, you're not giving up a place. You're just getting out the way. Yeah. But with this situation, it's just there's a much faster car coming up behind you, so be wary of that. I think it's just a precautionary measure that you're supposed to do. You see it a lot in Monaco, for example.
Yeah.
And those kind of things, even if it's not necessarily about a car being lapped. So we have Hamilton approaching the braking zone, and the whole time Hamilton is ahead. In fact, all the way up until contact, Hamilton is ahead. At no point does Verstappen get in front of Hamilton. And obviously what we have is a pretty big impact. And I kind of want to talk about safety first before we get into blame and all the rest of it. Because you got this very unusual sight to see two cars on top of each other like that.
Especially in today's era. It doesn't happen.
When Verstappen said he wanted to be on top this year, I don't think that's quite what he meant, is it? Thank goodness for the halo, though. Thank goodness for the halo and for the what is it? The roll? Is it called the rollover loop or roll loop or something like that?
Yes,
like that bit on the car. It's part of the crash structure. It's definitely a good thing that halo was there. I shudder to think what might have happened if it wasn't. Hamilton did seem like he had maybe tweaked his neck or something, because the wheel did come over, and you could see that at the very least it must have brushed the sort of fin, almost like a shark fin, on the back of his helmet. It looked like there was some kind of impact there. How again, I don't want to be too cynical, and I don't quite know how much Hamilton is hamming it up a little bit, because he was saying that he had hurt his neck and he had this plaster or something on his neck or whatever, and it definitely touched his helmet, but how badly it hit him, I don't really know. And I think that in such an incident, it would probably be beneficial to be a bit oh yeah, you really got me there, mate. You should really be careful, because even though it did hit him, it doesn't hurt to maybe play it up a bit to make it seem more serious and to kind of denounce your competitor a little bit. Hamilton knows how to play the game, so I wouldn't put it past him. Maybe overdoing it a little bit on how bad it was. I'm prepared to retract that statement if it turns out that he's got some really bad injury.
When the X-rays come back.
Yeah. So I guess I apologize in advance, but also not if it turns out otherwise. Anyway, so that's the main thing. First off, is that he was okay. Max didn't check that he was okay over the radio, but he did look to see that Hamilton was there. You can see that he looks towards the car and sees that Hamilton is in the car and moving, so he just disappears off. There's been a little bit of chat about how it's disgraceful that Verstappen didn't go over and see he was okay. I think he saw that he was all right and was just a bit sod this, I'm going home.
I think in an interview of Max after the race, and this is after the post-race interviews, he turned around and said, I saw that Lewis was moving, and in these situations, it's best if both drivers just walk away and calm down.
You don't want to do a Russell to Bottas. You don't want to end up like it was and make a fool of yourself.
Which is a massive step forward for Max, given it was only a couple of years ago. I think he was shoving Perez. Was it Perez? No, shoving Ocon in the weighing room after the race. So really mature from Max. after the incident. Leading up to it, I'm sure other actions could have been taken. But like you said, that halo has, and a lot of people are saying this on social media, and a lot of experts has saved a life again this weekend. We've seen it time and time again where cars have rolled or bits of debris have gone on top of the halo. Spa comes to mind where we had that big impact into turn one. But actually, that tyre it weighs, I think it's like 15, 20 kilos. And they're moving fast, and the car does end up on top of that halo for a couple of seconds, and then it does roll forward onto like the front of the car. But that halo is the only thing between Lewis Hamilton and that car. So significant injury was avoided today because of a fantastic device which has kept so many drivers safe, even in the last couple of years. And I just remember going back, to 2000. When was it introduced? 2017? 2018?
Yeah, 18 must have been the first season, yeah.
And everyone said it's quite unsightly. The drivers know the risk. They put themselves at risk. This is what they do. This is what they get paid to do. It's not unsightly at all. It's part of the car now. Formula One cars look strange without it when you look at old Formula One cars now. But thank you so much. Like, safety has come so far in this sport in the last couple of years. And it has to, because we obviously react to incidents. You can't be very proactive in the sport because you don't know what cars are going to do in the future. But the FIA are very good at reacting, and they've put that measure in place, and they've definitely kept the driver out of hospital this weekend.
Yeah, definitely. Any kind of aesthetic argument is kind of irrelevant now, seeing as what it's been able to prevent. So now, like you say, it is part of the look of the cars now. So I think it's been integrated quite well as well. So
yes,
it's done quite well. Right. So yeah, what about the curbs then? Because it seems like a lot of people are not very happy with the sausage curbs, because at that corner, obviously Max, as he tries to hold his position going into the left-hander, ends up going over the sausage curbs, and the car is kind of unsettled at first and has a bit of a bounce. And then as it is in that kind of sort of oscillation, if you like,
yes,
he then sort of comes into contact with the rear wheel. And it does look like a combination of that contact with the wheel and the bumping of the curbs and the kind of lifting of the car seems to exacerbate that effect and then lift Max's car over the Mercedes. There does seem to be a lot of people not very happy with the sausage curbs in general. Would you see sausage curbs removed from a corner like that? And if so, what would they be replaced with?
I wouldn't see them removed, because the idea is that you don't drive over them. They're a deterrent. And so many cars this weekend managed to avoid that sausage curb by avoiding that corner if they go too deep into that corner, if they're not going to make that corner because they're side by side with a competitor, or they're being squeezed by a competitor. They cut the corner, they go on they rejoin safely, and they continue with the race, and they live to fight another day. Got slightly smaller curbs in turn 4, but they still bounce the car a little bit. It's a deterrent. It's there to stop the cars from taking the liberty of cutting the corner. So don't cut the corner is my answer.
Yeah, I'm kind of inclined to agree, because even if they do back out and go across, there's like a sort of what looks like a bit of spare track going between the two parts of the corners, where if you back out, you go across that bit. You still have to bounce across the curbs as a sort of punishment for not making the corner. And
you can't fly over them. The whole idea is if people miss the corner, you can't just put your foot down and rejoin at more speed than actually it would be if you took the corner the correct way. You have to slow down, otherwise you're going to damage your car. And that's what they're designed to do. So it's just an unfortunate set of circumstances where, like you said, the oscillation of Max's car coming off that curb and then hitting the forward spinning rear wheel of Hamilton's car just pushed Max's car into the air and gave it that height. It was a very special set of circumstances which caused this incident. But the incident shouldn't have happened, if you ask me. There was ways out.
The sausage curbs thing is interesting, and people have talked about sausage curbs before. I remember the Singapore sling, which was not very popular with a lot of the engineers, because the drivers would try and find a way to kind of negotiate it without avoiding it completely, and it would always end up with loads of damaged floors and people ending up in the wall. And It's a difficult one. I'd be interested to know any possible alternatives to that because, like you say, there has to be some kind of deterrent to stop people from just blowing through it. And even if they do, even if they end up in a position where they've got to give positions back or the like, there's still something to be gained there by potentially doing that. So, yeah, it's a tough one. I'm not quite sure how I feel exactly about the sausage curbs things. I'll have to have a little read about it or something. But yeah, I'm kind of inclined to agree that the fact that he got onto the sausage cubs at all was not just because the sausage cubs were there, but rather because he elected to try and hold that line and thus ended up on the curbs, which I think brings us to the incident proper. Shane, give us your thoughts on the steward's response to this incident.
Well, first of all, I just want to point out that how in the world did both of these drivers end up on the same bit of track going into the same corner after both these teams had horrendous pit stops? I think that's just, you've already said it's absolutely crazy, and you just can't write this stuff.
Butterfly effect in action, isn't it?
Yeah, we've got the two championship leaders here who've had a collision before, and they've only done it again. But the FIA's reaction. So it was under investigation, wasn't it? It was noted during the race that it would be investigated after the race and a decision would be made. I'm not a fan of that. I really dislike investigating incidents after the race. But because of the set of circumstances we were presented with, and that's both drivers being out of the race, I can see why they took their time and they wanted to investigate it after the race. Now, we were very fortunate this weekend because Alex and I managed to watch the race together virtually for the first time in what probably is over a year now, just because our schedules are so far apart. It's crazy. And we both said racing incident, didn't we? It was a racing incident. It was two drivers going for the same bit of tarmac, and it was just an accident waiting to happen, which was, made worse by these huge sausage curves, but that could have been avoided. A 3-place grid penalty was awarded to Max Verstappen a couple of hours after the race. I didn't see it for a while, to be fair. What do I think of that? I'm a bit disappointed, to be honest. Where does the blame lie? It's hard to say whether it was 50-50. I don't think it was 50-50. I think the blame was probably 60-40, Max more at fault because he continued to push for a corner, which he was never, ever going to take. He was never going to achieve the corner he wanted to achieve. Lewis could have given more room, but at no point was that corner ever up for contention. Lewis was always ahead going into the corner, and then going into the second corner, Lewis was always ahead. Max could have backed out. Looking at the turn 4 incident into turn 1, the lap 1 incident at turn 4 where Lewis backed out, Max could have done exactly the same thing, and they could have forced it all the way down to the next chicane and done exactly the same thing. So I do think Max is slightly more to blame in these set of circumstances, but did I think it would result in a 3-place grid penalty for Russia? Absolutely not. I just blew my mind. I don't know how that's anything more than a racing incident. A couple of people have maybe suggested that this was tactical. This was a tactical. Well, this move was tactical. The result of this move was always going to be inevitable, and that's 2 cars out of the race. And it only benefits one person at the end of the day. Red Bull had a lead going into the race. Max out-qualified Lewis, so picked up a couple more points compared to Lewis, and now both drivers are DNF'd in the actual race. So Max has maintained his lead and also increased it. I don't say I agree with that, but that's what's being, suggested. Even by the Sky Sports team, it's quite worrying that these things are being suggested straight away. But that's my take on it. I think it was a racing incident, a little bit more Max's fault. Can't believe there was a 3-place grid penalty, and I'm sure it won't be the last thing which happens this season. I really don't.
Well, yeah, when we watched it together, like you say, we both said it was a racing incident. I think maybe I do feel in retrospect like I was maybe being a little bit flippant at the time myself. Having had some time to think about it and make some notes and kind of watch it again a few times, I can kind of clarify my thoughts on it a little bit more.
Go ahead, I'm interested.
I can't help but find myself looking at my personal concept of the racing incident kind of shifting and evolving as this season goes ahead. It's really had such an impact. I mean, Max Verstappen as a driver has had quite a big impact on how we steward Formula One races just because of the way
absolutely
he drives. And I don't mean that as an insult. I mean that as in, like, he is such a kind of unique racer that's the impact that he's had on it, which is exciting, even if occasionally it can be a bit frustrating in the way that it makes it can make the rules just even more complicated sometimes. Yeah, I think there's an important distinction between leaving a space and letting another car just go by. And it's in that kind of area between those two things that what most people consider hard racing exists. And it seems to me that in order for Hamilton to give Verstappen a car's width through the corner at what would be turn 2, he would have to go very wide indeed, because these Formula One cars are pretty big. They have a somewhat limited turning circle. And if you look at the second part of the Rettifilo, it's a really tight angle. So in order for Verstappen, both cars to stay on the track and Hamilton to give him space, he'd have to go right out wide in order to give him enough room, which in such a corner is essentially giving it up. It's essentially letting him go by. And when you combine that with the fact that at no point is Max ahead of Hamilton, he's not even fully alongside, like directly alongside at any point. He's always at least a certain amount behind. I think the closest he gets is his front wing just next to Hamilton's left front tyre. I think that's the closest that he gets. I think when you consider those two things, I think that I kind of feel the same way about this that I felt about the incident with at Silverstone, which is that I'm not surprised that they've penalised Max, because you said so yourself. He is the one driver most at fault if you have to hand it to someone. And I think that's probably what's influenced the stewards' decision, is that they found someone predominantly at fault. Whereas a racing incident is generally, I mean, it's not a very well-defined idea, really. The stewards themselves don't really have a provision for it. A driver has either broken the rules or they haven't. So, but most people probably consider a racing incident to be one in which the blame can be equally portioned. And I don't think that's true here. When you look at successful moves into this chicane where the driver that overtakes is on the outside coming into turn 1, I think of something like Sainz overtaking Raikkonen last year near the end of the race, or Hamilton overtaking Raikkonen in 2018. Yeah, because Raikkonen was in a Ferrari. Both instances of Raikkonen getting overtaken as it happens. In both of those instances, the car that overtakes, whether it be Hamilton or Sainz, both those instances, the car that overtakes is ahead before they even reach the corner.
Yeah.
Because when you're ahead at that corner, you have you have the angle, you have the amount of track to get the angle to sort of command a certain amount of the track. And thus, if the other driver were to not give you space, they would be hitting you. But this is not the case here, because Verstappen is kind of behind the whole time. So he's there behind, and so the angle isn't the same. He has to force his way into Hamilton in order to make space. And as I said before, in order for Hamilton to make room at turn 2, he basically has to go so wide as to give up the whole corner. And giving up and letting someone go through is not racing. So I kind of see why the stewards have penalised Max here, because it is mostly his fault. And you look at the notes, they deemed Max at fault because of the actual entry into the turn 1. They kind of, when you look at the notes, they consider the whole of the chicane to be treated as one corner, because there's a braking zone and then there's the corner itself, essentially. So yeah, I kind of think that I can kind of see this as being the right call in some ways. If they had called it a racing incident, I wouldn't be surprised. But the fact that they've blamed Max and given him a penalty, I think I can see the logic in that, and I think it is reasonable. And thus, I think that's kind of what I said about the incident with Hamilton at Silverstone as well, is that it was more his fault than Max's. You know, he agreed perhaps a little hesitantly at the time, but he didn't use all of the available track to the right-hand side, and he kind of understeered into them, and so he was more to blame, really. Now, what complicates matters is, of course, at the time, Hamilton carried on and he could be penalised in the race, whereas here, both cars were out, and so they had to be penalised in a different manner. And I think what I find frustrating is that, and we said this at the time, don't want to see a sort of symbolic penalty. If you're going to penalise people, do it in a way that feels like it has some kind of legitimacy, that it can be taken seriously. But a 3-place grid penalty feels tokenistic. It feels like they're not willing to go far enough to actually commit to their decision. They're saying it's your fault, but here's a sort of token penalty as a result. And I think a lot of people probably felt the same way about Hamilton's penalty in Silverstone as well, that 10 seconds felt kind of lenient if it was really meant to be that's dangerous, you can't do that, so here's a sort of minor 10-second penalty, which Hamilton went on to win the race. And I'm sure nobody felt more aggrieved than Verstappen fans about that one. So yeah, I kind of find myself feeling the same way about this as I did about Silverstone, but towards Max instead of Hamilton.
So let's talk about this penalty and what it means going into the Russian Grand Prix. So for example, Mercedes have been quite strong in Russia, haven't they? Bottas is one of Bottas's favourite tracks. It seems to be one of the few ones he wins at yearly, which is obviously really good for him. But look at turn 1 and 2. So turn 1 in Russia is actually that little kink in the right, a little kink right, and then turn 2 is the heavy braking zone. A 3-place grid penalty. So say if Max qualified first, he'd be starting second, third, or fourth.
He would start fourth.
He'll start fourth. But more importantly, he's starting behind a car, which he's going to get slipstream off going into turn 2. Now, it just seems bizarre that this penalty was for taking another driver out and, causing an incident. But actually, if Max does well on Saturday in 2 weeks' time, he's going to be sat behind Lewis or Bottas into turn 1, and then might get the slipstream and overtake him into turn 2 because he's because of this penalty. I find it very bizarre that penalty could then be done and dusted within one corner. It doesn't have any lasting impact, and like you said, the severity of the penalty seems quite non-existent compared to the incident itself. And like you said, Max Verstappen fans were probably saying the same thing about Lewis Hamilton at Silverstone. A 3-place grid penalty for next week doesn't really seem like it's going to do much at all. It's a matter of 10 or 12 meters on the grid. Surely that's not a penalty, is it? It's not really a penalty, is it? Let's be honest.
Well, who is getting the penalty and what track they're getting the penalty at shouldn't factor in really, because the drivers should be getting the penalties. They should be being apportioned penalties in the same way,
equally,
irrespective of who it is. But yeah, the issue is that in general, it's not, like you say, it's just not quite enough. How do you feel about, and I noted this down earlier actually, how do you feel about time penalties of 10 seconds and above being accrued in a race coming with an automatic 5-place grid penalty at the next race?
What do you mean? Sorry. So
if a driver accrues a total of 10 seconds of time penalties in a race, or a single 10-second time penalty, it also comes with a 5-place grid penalty at the next race.
I think that shows that the FIA is serious about clean driving. And that's what needs to happen. There needs to be consequences for these drivers' actions, and these consequences can't be over and done with within the same race. So I think that's a pretty good idea.
Because it seems to me that I think a grid penalty should be a minimum of 5 places for one thing.
Where's 3 come from? I've never seen a 3-place grid penalty before.
It's like giving people a 2-second time penalty. Like, it's just pathetic. What are we going to do next? Like, football's going to come out with a half a yellow card, and like, well, if you get 4 of these, you get a full yellow card. Like, it's just nonsense. And I do wish that if they really want to discourage drivers from what they see as dangerous driving or unacceptable moves, make the penalty something that really gives them something to think about, rather than this sort of somewhat tokenistic move instead. So think that's that pretty much covers how I feel about the incident.
What's likely to happen next week is, or in 2 weeks' time in Russia, is that Max will take an engine penalty on top of his 3-place grid penalty and just start at the back of the grid because they're already down on place anyway. And then they'll probably do the same to Lewis. So what is usually a traditionally quite boring Grand Prix, might have Lewis and Max starting at the back of the grid, working their way through, hopefully a little bit cleaner this time. But if you're going to take penalties for a new engine at any point in the rest of the season, you might as well do it and you've already got a 3-place grid penalty. And if you're Mercedes and you know your competitors starting halfway down the field, you could probably then afford to take a penalty yourself because you're leveling the playing field. It's all very bizarre. It's all very political. Well, I do enjoy it, but I still would have rather seen those two drivers go to the end and fight it out on track. But it was entertaining nevertheless.
Well, they had a very similar clash, didn't they, on lap 1? But Hamilton, and it was the Hamilton basically, he kind of locked up. He clearly braked when he realised he wasn't going to make it and bounced over the curbs instead. But Max wasn't prepared to do that. Now, I don't think he did it in a way to deliberately crash out Hamilton or anything like that. Because, like you say, there are some reasons why he might want to do it. He's not entirely without motivation to do that, given that he's leading the championship, etc., etc.
And also, let's not forget that Max had an 11-second pit stop. So driving out that pit stop, he probably wasn't in the best set of mind.
No,
probably had a really good outlap, and then thought, "There's Lewis. I'm leading the championship. I'm going for it. It's now or never." And it ended up being never.
Ended up being never. Yeah. Well, post incident, there's a couple of things that are of note. Firstly, it was amusing to see Bottas in the post race interview. It's kind of irritating that they kind of focused so much on asking him about the incident. Like, the guy's just had an amazing drive, and David Coulthard was like, "What do you make of this incident?" It's like, "Oh yeah, it's all about everyone else, basically." But Bottas just appeared amused more than anything else, which I thought was pretty funny.
You mentioned something when we were watching it, about Bottas, is that I think it was overshadowed what he managed to achieve this weekend. A couple of drivers were overshadowed due to the McLaren, the McLaren victory. But Bottas went from P20 to P3. And you mentioned when we were watching it, if Hamilton had done that, he would be praised. He would have been called Sir Lord Hamilton. He would have been the best driver in Formula One going from the back of the grid to the podium. And Bottas has just done exactly the same thing. Yes, he's in a faster car. Yes, it's Monza, so straight line speed is everything. But fair play to the guy. I'm the first person to give him the first person to give him a lot of criticism, race in, race out, week in, week out. But he had a tremendous weekend, and I thought it was a real shame that the first thing he got asked on the podium was, "Turn around, Bottas. What do you reckon of these two?" I'm thinking, hold on a second, give the guy a round of applause. He's just done a pretty good job.
Interestingly as well, in the post-race interviews, was Christian Horner seemed a lot more diplomatic after the race, didn't he? I think despite how one feels about the incident at Silverstone, the way that Red Bull responded there was a bit of a PR mess. I thought, they were running Albon on a test, having him go around the corner the same way over and over.
Yeah, I forgot about that.
Just generally being very sour in the post-race interviews, calling it a hollow victory, and it just really didn't do them any favours outside the sort of Verstappen faithful, I suppose. Whereas in contrast, Horner's response this week was a lot more becoming and possibly
a lot more team principle like.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, they probably felt that Max was more at fault, and they maybe knew this and knew that they had to temper their response as a result. I think it was Andrew Shovlin from Mercedes who made that observation. I think that's possibly about right. But even so, like, the tone of their response is a bit more of the kind of professional demeanour that you'd expect.
I think it says a lot when Christian Horner comes out and says, "Yes, it was a racing incident." That probably says a lot in its own words, because if it wasn't a racing incident and Lewis was predominantly at fault, you could almost be safe to say that Christian Horner would be singing Max's praises and putting Lewis's name in the mud. But at the moment, it's a racing incident, which basically says to me, we know Max was at fault. We're a little bit gutted that he crashed out and took out Lewis. Let's try and move past this. We're really sorry.
Didn't hear Toto Wolff calling for Max to get a race ban.
No, you didn't.
But that was interesting. Anything else you want to add on this incident then? I don't want to sit on it for too long because
no, I think
there was other things that happened in this race too.
Was there? No, I think that's it from me with regards to the Max and Lewis round 2 incident.
Yeah. Right, where are we going next?
I want to talk about Lando Norris just quite briefly. I'm sure we'll touch on McLaren and Lando and Daniel later on in the podcast. I know we will. You're gearing up for.
It sounds like we're going to talk about McLaren in general here. So,
well, I just want to talk about Lando and how he did such a fantastic job in the sprint race and in the full feature race in keeping Lewis Hamilton behind him for the majority of the race, up until obviously Lewis had that little off with Max. No more on that. But for the whole of the sprint race, Lando was putting that car exactly where it needed to go to keep Lewis Hamilton behind him. Throughout the whole race, it was absolutely fantastic. Lewis was in and out of DRS zones trying to catch Lando. But because of the track and the rear wings, DRS isn't really worth anywhere near as much as it traditionally is because of the really thin wings we run at this track. But fair play to Lando. He managed to keep Lewis behind him. In the McLaren probably was a slower car this week, but they just held Lewis behind him, and it just goes to show that this 21-year-old British driver has got a long old career ahead of him, because at the moment he's really starting to shine. And every couple of podcasts we sit back and we mention how well Lando Norris is doing and how much he's matured over the last couple of years and how much of a brilliant racing driver he's becoming. And this weekend again, he just showed us that actually, just casually keeping Lewis Hamilton behind him on a track where that Mercedes should have been clearly out in front. So fair play to Lando, and I really think this is the start of something really special for him and McLaren, to be fair.
Yeah, Lando was great. Very, very good defensive driving, like you say. I don't know if we want to get any other little topics out of the way before we talk about McLaren. We might as well save the best till last.
I'm happy to crack on. Have you got anything else you want to talk about?
The only thing I was going to mention, and something that was overshadowed, is Russell in the points.
Oh yes,
which
yes.
Normally it's gone from being this huge deal. Everyone's super hyped. They're going to get points. Can't believe Williams. They're going to finally break their streak. They did that. Then he got on the podium because of the fast that happened in Belgium.
We don't talk about that.
Then he sort of snuck into the points here, and it was barely even mentioned. So Williams now becoming a bit more comfortable with points. I suppose you could argue that because Verstappen and Hamilton were knocked out, it meant that he gained a net 2 places and otherwise would have been 11th. But hey, you've got to finish the race. You've got to not get in trouble. And that's a key part of that incident as well, isn't it? Is that you've got to just not get involved in accidents. You've got to try and finish the race. And finishing the race when other people are getting knocked out, that is finishing on merit. So
yeah, five drivers didn't finish the race. So, that's their own problem. That's their own fault, apart from Yuki Tsunoda, who I think just didn't start the race. Yeah, he didn't even start the race. That's probably not his fault.
I think Gasly was told to stop because they were going to break everything otherwise. They had some kind of issue that was possibly a holdover from the accident before.
Yeah.
And as for Tsunoda, I'm not quite sure what happened. He just suddenly was in the garage, so I'm not quite sure what happened.
Yeah, he's got a DNS against his name, and obviously Nikita had an engine issue towards the end of that race on lap 41, and they had the 2 championship rivals going at it. But yeah, fantastic from George. I think I even tweeted, everyone's so focused on McLaren and this incident that George has got P9, which 6 weeks ago would have been the biggest news in Formula One. And yet here we are. Oh yeah, George is in the points again. He's just scored 2 points. Very lucky, mind you, wasn't he? Let's be honest, because Nicholas Latifi officially in the sprint race out-qualified Russell. So Latifi finished ahead of Russell in the sprint race.
Yeah.
Latifi boxed, the safety car came out, then George boxed. So George went from P14 to P8 in the matter of a couple of laps due to the safety car, because it was just around the safety car, it was just around the pit stop phase. So George was quite lucky to jump his teammate, but nevertheless kept it ahead of one of the Alpine drivers, and didn't bottle it, didn't cause an accident, didn't spin out. It was a real good performance, and another 2 points from Williams.
Yeah, Latifi's really come alive recently.
He really has.
He had the best overtake of the race at the Netherlands, and he had some more overtakes here with decent pace. Things suddenly looking a lot more positive for Williams, which is nice. That's what we want to see. And now we know that Latifi is staying and Albon will be there. That'll be an interesting pairing. I'll be interested to see how that goes. Looking forward to that. Fingers crossed for Williams. Positive news at last. We can no longer have to see people, crying their eyes out because they got P9, which
I know.
There's something rather kind of unbecoming about that. It's like, all right, guys, you didn't win the championship. You finally grabbed a couple of points. I know it's relative, but still, good news. Good news for Williams. That's what we like. Right.
Go
Can
on,
we do
Alex.
it now? Can we talk about
McLaren? I can see it in your eyes. You want to. This is your moment. Take it away.
3,213 days, Shane. That's how long it's been since McLaren last won a race. Over 10 years. I mentioned in the Dutch post-race Grand Prix, post-race podcast, that we hadn't had a 1-2 this year. And the last time it took so long, it was in 2012. I think it was Red Bull back then. And here we are at the next race with a McLaren 1-2. I never would have expected this, even knowing how favourable Monza would have been, or was likely to be for the MCL 35M. And after all the Honda years and all the seasons of like slowly clawing their way back, and problems with engines, problem with reliability, problem with chassis, or just this year is going to be our year. We've done it now. We've got the right people. We've got the right people in the right places, and just still being really mediocre. And then you got Fernando Alonso is coming back to McLaren, brilliant. Oh, and then being really mediocre again. It's just such a relief to see McLaren go from GP2 engine to being strong at power tracks. Like it's just such a relief to go from that to the other. To see a McLaren capable of what was technically not quite, but basically almost a lights to flag victory for Ricciardo. And of course, to see Ricciardo himself comfortable with the car. He's been crap for a lot of the season. I'm going to say he's been crap because he's just not been able to get to grips with that car. You know, fannying around in P13, you know, not even struggling to get out of Q1. And there's Lando, you know, he's nearly put it on the front row multiple times. He's got it on the podium multiple times. And you're just going, what's going on, Daniel? Like, why can't you get this car? After the summer break, he's finally managed to make sense of this car. I don't know what's clicked, but it's finally happened. And the Honey Badger is back. You know, he wanted to prove that he could be a winner away from Red Bull. He's done that. Lando with overtake of the race as well. When he had to take to the grass at the Curva Grande after the safety car restart. I think it was Leclerc he was going past. Maximum bravery. I've seen cars take less grass in a straight line and end up in a wall. So that was real quality from Lando, real bravery. It's hard not to look at both cars and just say that they both had an almost flawless race. It was an incredible team victory. And it feels even more vindicating that it wasn't just, there was chaos and they ended up in the lead. They were legitimately fast and competitive. Were they the fastest car on track by the numbers exactly? Maybe, maybe not. But there are a lot of signs on the timesheets that show that Ricciardo's pace was very much at least in line with Max's. Ricciardo was in front of Max for a good 20-odd laps, I think it was, and Max couldn't get past. So for me, this is not a sort of, they're a bunch of chaos and they ended up winning. For me, this is a legit merit victory. And it was incredible. It was incredible to watch. It was such a relief. Now, Shane, let me hit you with a question. Now that I've gone on for a little bit there.
That's fun. I love it. I love the passion. I really do love the passion.
I'm going all in today. So, as Lando took P2 after the safety car restart, it looked like there could be a bit of an awkward situation brewing, didn't it? Because Lando looked a bit faster than Daniel at first, and ultimately Ricciardo was given the hurry up. And he did do it. He did in the race itself. He obviously did get much better times. He managed to pull away a little bit, maintained a reasonable gap so that Lando didn't have any issues from Perez behind. But hypothetically, if Lando was quicker and Daniel couldn't respond in that moment, you put yourself in the shoes of Randeep Singh, who is the McLaren strategy director. I assume would be making the executive decision. Do you ask Daniel to step aside, tell Lando to hold position, or maybe even let them race? Like, what do you do in that scenario? You've got McLaren 1-2, and Lando's possibly a bit faster, possibly facing issues from Perez behind. How do you respond in strategy?
I think you hold them. I think at present time, you have a P1, you have a P2. Yeah, Perez was, Perez was behind him. If Perez was closing up, would I switch them? No, I don't think I would, because if you're going to have a faster driver, I'd want him defending from the car behind him. I wouldn't want Lando to overtake and leave Daniel to drop down into P3 or P4 potentially. If Lando's got the straight line speed and can get a fantastic exit out of the parabolica, then why would I sacrifice that? Why, if Lando could keep the DRS out, keep Perez out of the DRS range, I think I would keep him in P2. As much as that hurts me to say, and I would love both of those drivers to go racing. And at one point during the race, I thought, Lando might actually have a go. Lando might try it on Daniel, but I think the outcome which happened was the best possible outcome for that race. And I think if you tried to switch the drivers at any point, it would have just disrupted it.
It's a tough call, that one, isn't it? Because you could also look at it and that just having the potential swap over could cause problems. Yeah. And either driver could end up losing out to Perez if they ended up as the one behind. And
I think it's key to remember that Daniel Ricciardo was in clean air and was maintaining a set pace. And Norris did seem a little bit faster, but he was also in dirty air. So I think Norris on track, on over a qualifying lap or in free air, would have been faster than Ricciardo. But that's not surprising given Norris's pace this year. But I still stand by it. I wouldn't want to hang Ricciardo out to dry in P2 when he might have struggled to follow Norris. At the time, it was working. They were both creeping further and further in front of the field, like a tenth or two a lap. They were pulling away from the drivers behind them. Just keep the consistency. Let's not try any shenanigans. And what they did was perfect. It was just a perfect day from McLaren.
And I think that they responded very well after the race as well, and that obviously they celebrated and enjoyed it. And, everyone had a good party and everything. But the message from the big cheeses, McLaren, Zach Brown, Andrea Seidel, and various, they made it clear that they weren't going to get carried away, which I think is absolutely the right thing. Like, don't get ahead of yourself, because it is a fantastic race and it is on merit and all the rest of it. But they're not about to start challenging for the championship. I don't expect that. There's still a long ways to go yet, but it is vindication for the decisions that they've made recently. It is a sign of what a strong team it is now, and that if anything, it's the fact that they've focused less on trying to make it seem like that we're going back to where we belong to be, like where they used, when they used to start going on about now we've got all the right people in the right place, and we're going to, the sense that they keep trying to just return to glory. Yeah. And it's almost like they're trying too hard to big themselves up. Whereas now I think they've got the sense that actually it's better to be a little bit sort of quietly confident and, humble. Yeah. So it's working. It's working. Yeah. Which is the main
I think
thing.
It's important to remember as well, throughout this year, Ricciardo's pulled aside for Lando a couple of times, and Lando's gone on to score a podium or score on the top 5 and score decent points, where Ricciardo's races kind of not been sacrificed, but then Ricciardo dropped off. So it was only fair that if Ricciardo was in the lead and he needed a rear gunner, Lando Norris was that person. The team works. Teammates got to work together. It can't always be because Lando's had the better year, which undoubtedly he has because of the statistics you gave earlier. Obviously, Lando's been faster in the majority of races, out-qualified the majority of times, and won and got 2/3 more points, or double the points, sorry. So when it was Daniel Ricciardo's time to shine, he had that rear gunner. It wasn't a, come on guys, I've been better all season, let me through. It was I'll sit here. If this is what you want, I'll sit here. And it's great because it works. One of the best couples on the grid. You said that when we were watching it live. That these two, when they were signed together, had the potential to be one of the hottest, fastest, bunch of drivers on the grid, and it's slowly becoming a reality. I think we'll hopefully see more of this towards the end of the season. Like you said, don't want to get too carried away, but they have scored podiums last year. They've scored podiums this year, and then they've scored a second and a first place as well. Plenty of races left in the season. It could, I wouldn't surprise me if another podium didn't crop up. The team is on the up, and at the set, when they're performing well, they do a fantastic job.
Yeah, I definitely think another podium at least will happen. I think that's a reasonable expectation. So just feeling very, very positive about it, feeling more vindicated. I was never really worried because obviously they've had some really good results this season, but to have a 1-2 is just way beyond what I thought would happen. I definitely didn't expect anything like that. So it was pretty magical, and also incredible that the race that we happened to have watched together happened to be that one
was
as well. So.
Magical, wasn't it? It really was magical. Honestly, guys, from start to finish, as soon as Ricciardo got Max into turn 1, we were both ecstatic, like shouting, cheering, applauding. And I think I speak on behalf of us that when that race got restarted on lap 33 or 36, I thought, okay, there's 25 laps to go, or however many laps there was. It's like, we're still asking a lot here, aren't we? We're still asking a lot for McLaren to stay ahead for 30 odd laps or 25 laps. And the laps kept on coming down. And I said to you, Alex, 20 laps to go, 15 laps to go, 10 laps to go, which probably wasn't doing your nerves any favors, but 5 laps to go, 2 laps to go.
I'm not gonna get excited about this until Daniel is literally at the parabolica on the final lap. Like,
yeah. And this is true. Alex didn't even mutter a word for the last 10 laps. He was so calm, cool, and collective. It was only when they were both going down that back straight did you celebrate. It was what a race. What a moment as well.
A pleasure to
it really
watch.
was. Well, we're both off for I think we're both off for Russia, which I can't see being the same kind of love story towards the end. We'll see. Maybe Bottas will get his win again, and then that'll be it for him.
Yeah, we'll see. Right, moving on to our view from the stands. Obviously, we've got a few comments on this one that we can go over. Some of it we kind of touched on before, but we can clarify a few bits and bobs here. Let's start with @ArklessKyle. Thanks, Kyle, for getting in touch again. He asks us, was the Max and Lewis crash the end of sausage curbs? Personally, yes, and this was waiting to happen in Imola and in F3 a few years back when the car was launched. So we kind of touched on sausage curbs here. Do you think that this will... it does seem possible that there might at least be a review of sausage curbs. I think perhaps the FIA might be remiss not to at least review what happened here, which I think they will. Whether or not it will mean the end of sausage curbs, I'm not quite so sure.
They might be resized. They might be down profiled by 10, 20%. You still want that deterrent so cars can't fly over the escape road and rejoin at 100 miles an hour. I think the deterrent still needs to be there, but maybe not as thick or as tall, because that definitely got the car up on its... Well, it definitely launched the car a couple of inches up in the air, which then when it hit Lewis's tyre, obviously got even more traction. So I don't think it will be the end of sausage curbs. They, like you said, I'm sure there'll be a review, and they just might be reprofiled or downscaled a little bit to avoid such a big launch. And to be fair, I remember watching that F3 launch when he went over the sausage curb, which I think was in Spa, and the car did fly. But equally, the driver did floor it when he was off the track and then hit a sausage curb. So, there's a bit of give and take here. Like, you can't just, I'll leave it there.
Not only that, but any possible accidents that come from sausage curbs are counteracted by the safety measures in place within the car. So yes, we saw a car on top of another today, which is quite rare in F1. But we also have the halo and the good crash structure and the like. So yeah, I don't think it'll be the end of sausage curbs. But thanks very much, Carl, for getting in touch. Appreciate that. Who's next?
Moving on to Steve Hales. Thank you very much for getting in contact. And he has asked regarding the Max and Lewis incident. We had a couple of these today. He got off very lightly considering his professional foul. Now, Steve isn't without his right to be talking about a professional foul, because actually Sky Sports and Channel 4 and various media outlets have all been talking about how Max has caused this incident, and yet he's walked away from this Grand Prix with a further lead into the championship. So I can see why people are questioning this. I would like to think, my gut says it wasn't a professional foul. My thought is Max was a bit hot-headed through his hugely problematic pit stop, had an outlap, saw Lewis coming out of the pits and thought, this is my one and only opportunity. I know how hard it is to follow around here. Put it into a position where he knew he wasn't going to get out of it. And the actual accident itself was just, that's what it was. It was an accident, but he put himself in that position. So 3 place grid penalty, yes, I do think that was quite light. But equally, if I was a Max fan, like Alex said earlier on in the podcast, a 10-second penalty in Silverstone probably wasn't good enough either. But there it is. That's Formula One, and the FIA will choose to punish those who they seem fit with the punishment they seem necessary. But a 3-place grid penalty, I've never heard of that before. Well, where's this 3-place grid penalty come on? They probably just looked at his number and gone, you know what? Yes, 3-place grid penalty. That's what we'll give him. But Alex, what do you reckon?
I definitely agree with the first part. I think it got off a bit lightly. 3-place grid penalty, tokenistic. But I don't think I think seeing it as a professional foul is not quite the right way to look at it for me, because firstly, that term comes from football, I believe, and a professional foul, you deliberately kind of trip someone up because they might score. And yeah, you're going to get a yellow card for it, but you accept that because it's worth the risk to stop someone from scoring. But in this case, not only is I don't think there's enough motivation to get Verstappen to do that on purpose. If it were the last race of the season or a couple of races to the end and he's got like a 50-point lead or something, then yeah, I'd be like, that's pretty suspect. Like, and that's a pretty. It seems more professional foul-esque. But here, I think he's just got a bit hot-headed, and I don't think he's done it deliberately to crash anything out. I think he thinks that he's entitled to the track, really.
Yeah.
He just has that different mentality, as seen from the fact that in a similar incident between the two, Hamilton decides to give up and go over the curbs, and Max was like, "Nah, I need the space. I deserve the space." So, professional foul, no, but got off lightly, yes.
Do you think maybe the broadcasters and those commentating on the race should be more careful on how they decipher an incident straight away? Because I believe this professional foul was actually, words just came out of Sky Sports. Now, I don't know how old Steve is, or if he's a new fan to the sport, or if he's been watching it for maybe 30 or 40 years. But I can imagine any new fans coming into the sport and have seen this incident, which is, an unfortunate incident, and then, the people you're listening to, the commentary team who are meant to be professionals, start calling it a professional foul or a tactical crash. It doesn't really set the right tone, does it? It doesn't really do the sport any justice, especially to those new fans coming in. And again, Steve, I'm sorry, I have no idea how old you are, how long you've been watching the sport, but I just thought we'd just talk about it, how this term professional foul has come out from the commentary team, and yet they're none the wiser, are they? Who are they to make judgment? And by doing so, you're just causing arguments and rumors on the internet. So it's all very strange.
Yeah, it's really dominated a lot of the post-race talk as well, which is a bit disappointing. Like, it's a serious incident, but before the stewards had even finished their investigation, they're throwing around their conjecture. And I think it needs to be a little bit more measured and just a bit more positive as well, because you just had this brilliant race for McLaren, and it just felt like it was all about this incident, and a little bit questionable, certainly.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Steve. Always appreciate new people tweeting us, because it gets conversations starting, especially when it's pretty juicy. But thank you very much, and we hope to hear from you at the end of the Russian Grand Prix.
Right, moving on to Riley Gale 33, who's been in touch a few times. Thanks for getting in touch again. They ask, is it fair that Max gets a penalty and Lewis gets nothing? Trying to be unbiased, but in my opinion, the FIA favour Lewis and Mercedes more than Red Bull. Citation needed, Riley Gale 33. Citation needed, definitely. I'm not sure about the FIA favouring Lewis and Mercedes more, given that the last incident they penalised him. I do think it's the fact, as I mentioned before, the fact that Hamilton continued the race, whereas here both cars were out, really complicates matters when it comes to penalties. But I don't think I can accept that the FIA is biased to favour Lewis and Mercedes. But is it fair, Shane, that Max got a penalty and Lewis got nothing? Because I think we both agreed that Max was the main one to blame. Does that mean, though, in standards such as these, where it's not 90% the other driver's fault and 10% the other, should Lewis have got a minor slap on the wrist as well?
I don't think so. And it was only up until you mentioned earlier on in the podcast that what was Lewis meant to do? Take a really wide berth going into turn 2 to allow the Red Bull back on track to take the corner. that's not racing, is it? Like Lewis isn't going to almost drive the wrong direction to allow the Red Bull back on track. It was the Red Bull who positioned himself in the inappropriate manner, which caused the incident. So even though it was 60-40, or the more I think about it, the more I definitely feel like it's Max's fault, and it's heading towards more like 70-30. I think everyone's going to have a different opinion on the penalties, depending if you're a Lewis fan or a Red Bull fan with Max, or maybe if you don't support any of those drivers, you might think it should be something else. But yeah, it is a strange one. 3-place grid penalty doesn't seem appropriate, but there again, neither does the 10-second one. And do I think Lewis should have ended up with a penalty at the end of it? No, I think he was more of a passenger, to be honest. I don't think there's much he could have done apart from give up the position and let Max take the lead.
If you're penalising both drivers, you're admitting it's a racing incident. So that's surely
and that's why you don't need to. Yeah,
so,
exactly.
Yeah, I think that the stewards need to just commit. If anything, they need to commit more. To the penalties that they hand out. But thanks very much for getting in contact and getting conversation going. It's obviously a very divisive topic, but I like to think that we can discuss these things in a manner that is civil. There's a lot of hot-headedness around these issues, and it's important that we discuss it and we disagree and we talk about it. But ultimately, we don't need to be rude. Don't need to be nasty. We can enjoy a disagreement about it, and that's fine. So thanks to everyone, including Riley Gale here, 33, for getting in touch and being civil. That's what we like to see. So thanks so much for getting in contact. Who's next, Shane?
It's our favourite fan. It's RPM legend Dave Doherty, who's emailed in once again with a question which I feel like we've already summarised, or you summarised very well in this podcast so far. So Dave has said, your thoughts on the McLaren race? And I don't know what else to say apart from it was absolutely spectacular, and it was on merit. Like you said, it was on merit. It was true pace. They didn't just have a rainy race where they lucked into P1 or P2 and two cars took them out. Daniel took the lead on lap 1, turn 1, and then led for the majority of the race. So you know what? It was spectacular. Absolutely brilliant.
I think my thoughts on the race can be summed up that I've watched I've watched the highlights that were posted on YouTube maybe like 6 or 7 times now. So I think that pretty much sums it up. But I hope you enjoyed our earlier segment, Dave, where we talked about it. So thanks very much for getting in touch again. Always a pleasure. And our last contactee for the day, Daniel Fergie 25, another repeat contactee. Thanks very much for getting in touch. Daniel says, what a race. Would you say that this is one of the best races? And if so, which other race matches what we saw in Monza? Now, I'm assuming that Daniel means this season rather than the last, 70 odd years of Formula One. So,
yeah.
So this season, what races stick out to you as the big classics this season?
Oh, that's a really difficult conversation to just spring on somebody, Alex. Let's have a look. So Hungary sticks out as one of the better ones because we had Ocon win, and we had a great battle for P1 with between Ocon and Seb at the time. Obviously, Seb receiving his demotion later on, which was a shame. Great Britain. As a British fan, and I'm sure was there a crowd there this year? I think there was. Wasn't there?
Yeah, it was pretty big crowd.
I think
as well.
I think Lewis won that. Yeah, Lewis won that despite having his 10-second penalty, which would have been a huge buzz for the crowd, and great as a British fan. We had 2 races at Austria. I can't remember much about those. Remember much about those? Nothing sticks out.
Max Verstappen was absolutely dominant.
Yeah,
in
of course it was. It was the Red Bull Ring, wasn't it? But yeah, there's a couple for me. So you've got Great Britain and Hungary. What about yourself? Is there any races that stick out?
Oh, Belgian Grand Prix. What a classic.
The Belgian Grand Prix. Russell's P2. One of the most deserved podium finishes I've ever seen in my lifetime.
Nobody could get past him.
No, not one person.
They were literally not allowed to get past him.
Yeah. It was incredible.
Yeah, I really enjoyed Bahrain. I thought the opening race was really good. Thought that was good fun. It was a good way to get started. But Imola was really good. That was a great race. Very mixed. Obviously, the mixed conditions and everything that produced a bit of drama. Monaco was also pretty good. I thought was another for Monaco. I thought it was
For Monaco.
I thought it was all right. Baku, lots of drama.
Oh yes, there was.
There was a positive McLaren result for the French Grand Prix, and that was also much better than I thought it was going to be. So again, that was positive. Yeah, the 2 Austrian Grand Prix was sort of okay, but British Grand Prix definitely, Hungarian Grand Prix definitely. We saw one hell of a spectacle at Zandvoort, so I feel so spoilt as an F1 fan.
It's been an incredible year.
It's been an incredible year, and last year was an incredible year as well.
Yeah.
It just seems to get better and better at the moment.
So back to the question, would you say this was one of the best races this year? Is this your favourite race this year?
Oh yeah, this is my favourite race.
Without a doubt. Yeah, without a doubt.
It just has to be. Like I can't not see this as the best race given the results. So, and just in pure entertainment value, yeah, it was outstanding. Monza doesn't disappoint.
Monza, no, it doesn't, and it hasn't done for a while.
But thanks very much, Daniel. Appreciate your message. Thanks everyone who's been getting in touch via Twitter and all the other various means. You can always get in touch at RacePerMinute, or you can email us info@raceperminute.com. Go on the website, all the usual places. Get a conversation started. We can't promise that we'll always agree, but we always appreciate everyone getting in touch. And keep the conversation going.
Right, moving on. Now it's time for Driver of the Day and Championship Standings. So let's start with Driver of the Day. And I've just accidentally closed my tab, but I believe it was Daniel Ricciardo. The Honey Badger has returned. It was Daniel Ricciardo. Would you say it was deserved Driver of the Day, Alex?
It's one of those instances where it's a good popular vote. It's not just a sort of predictable popular vote. So very much understandable that he would be voted Driver of the Day. You're going with that as well. You're going with the popular vote.
I was torn between Daniel Ricciardo and Bottas, if I'm being honest. From P20 to P3 was a tremendous drive, and I know we don't always go for the driver of the most overtakes because that's not exactly really fair. But Bottas didn't put himself at the back of the grid. He had to take an engine penalty, so he made the best out of a situation which wasn't really his fault, and did a fantastic job. So, between those two drivers, it's a really difficult one. But I'm going to go with Daniel Ricciardo because he got Max straight off the line and led pretty much every single lap of this race, and just a flawless performance.
Yeah, this is really tough, even as a Team Papaya guy. Ricciardo, near flawless performance, took the lead, held on to it. Norris was also really hard to fault and was the ultimate wingman for Ricciardo. Did really well to hold off Hamilton. I am going to try and keep my claims of objectivity intact, though, and I'm going to go with Valtteri Bottas.
Okay, fair enough.
He went from the back of the grid to the podium with solid overtaking throughout as well. Clinical even. Didn't get in any trouble, didn't make any rash moves, all nice and tidy. Really reminded me of Abu Dhabi last year. Remember, he came from the back of the grid, he had a brand new engine. The DRS wasn't working until like lap 18 or something, and he was still making up a decent number of places. He can do it. He's, it's not just because he's got this Alpha contract and he's feeling good. The guy is capable of it. He's just not capable of it with enough reliability to be on the level of someone like Hamilton and whatever. Maybe that'll change in the future. I don't know. But anyway, he had a fantastic race here is what matters. And last year at Monza, he had a terrible start, didn't he? And he seemed to get stuck. And this year, it was Hamilton who got stuck. Stuck under Verstappen, that is. And whilst Valtteri was the one who came through the field, right? So I think it's a thoroughly deserved podium, put in a performance that not only hit the kind of expectations that you'd have of a current Mercedes driver, but like you said, if Lewis had done that, we'd be saying that's why he's so highly regarded. So he was struggling a little bit later on behind Perez. The mediums were starting to wane, but a stellar performance. I wish we saw that Bottas more often, to be honest, because it really was a fantastic performance.
If we saw that Bottas more often, he might be in that Mercedes next year. He might have been in that Mercedes next year.
Might be a world champion if he could do that every week.
Exactly. He's been with the team for a couple of years now. It's a shame that these circumstances have happened, and all of a sudden Bottas is putting like you said, a clinical performance and something he really should be proud of.
Have you seen that statistic where it's about Hamilton's teammates? His first teammate he was with for 1 year. His next teammate was with for 2 years. Next teammate for 3 years. Then 4 years. And Bottas has been 5 years. Because it's Alonso for a year. Kovalainen for 2 years.
Jensen
for 3. Rosberg for 4. And Bottas for 5.
Russell for 6. Yeah. You heard it here first.
Okay,
right, moving on to
moving
on to the championship standings. So I'll run you through the top 10, and then you can grace us with the bottom 11. Since now we've got 21 classifications in the 2021 season, which I find hilarious because we'll talk about that in just a second. But in first place, extending his championship lead, is Max Verstappen with 226.5 points, with Lewis Hamilton on 221.5 points. So only 5 points between them. Bottas moves back into P3 with 141 points. Lando Norris 132. Very close between Bottas and Norris. It could go either way. It could go either way towards the end of the season. Bottas is guaranteed to win Russia, so he'll extend his lead, and then who knows? It's fair game afterwards. Sergio Perez is into 5th place with 118 points, with Charles Leclerc with 104. Carlos Sainz right behind his teammate with 97.5. Daniel Ricciardo with 83 points, jumped a couple of positions this week because of his race win, which is absolutely fantastic. Pierre Gasly, 66 points, and Fernando Alonso rounding up the top 10 with 50 points.
The Alpines are in formation here with Ocon just after 45. And then it's the 2 Aston Martins. So we don't mention them this week at all, but again, they were pretty underwhelming. Sebastian Vettel was in the wars, wasn't he? He got shoved pretty hard by his teammate. I actually thought it was not that bad as some people were making it out to be. It was pretty aggressive given it's your teammate, but if it wasn't his teammate, it probably wouldn't have been seen as half as bad. So I think it's maybe a little ungentlemanly from Stroll. But
and Ocon into turn 3 as well.
Yeah, that was a little bit naughtier. He got a penalty for that, which is fair dues, really, because he genuinely did push Vettel off. But the 2 Aston Martins, 12th and 13th, with 35 and 24, respectively. Tsunoda, P14, 18 points. That's all he's managed to get, 18. Gasly has 66. That's, I think we've mentioned as a percentage, that's got to be the biggest gulf between teammates. Russell, 15th, with 15 points.
It's crazy.
If you'd said... let's say if we'd gone back to I don't know where did he? I can't remember where he got his points now. Where was the? It was Hungary, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Where they got their points. So if you'd said before the summer break, George Russell will have 15 points by the Italian Grand Prix, that had been pretty mad. But that's where he is, and he's followed by his teammate with 7, Nicholas Latifi.
Which is even more of a shock.
Yeah, exactly. Well, certainly considering where we thought the guy would be before. Then it's the Alfa Romeos, Raikkonen with 2, Giovinazzi with 1. Then we have Schumacher, Kubica, and Mazepin, all with 0. Mazepin in last place, behind Kubica, who's been in 2 races.
Yes.
So
Kubica secured a P14 this race, didn't he? Which is higher than what Mazepin's managed to secure the whole year.
That's right. Yeah, I mean it's difficult. Mazepin's got a dog of a car, so that's got to hurt. And Mazepin was also gained the most positions in sprint qualifying in Italy.
True.
I think he got more positions than anybody else. He has started to show a little bit of pace. He was miles behind, and he's doing a little bit better now. So, and I think it's pretty certain that he's going to be there next year. So. Who knows? The
financial backing says so. Yeah, you never know. Right, let's go through the constructor standing, shall we?
Move us on to the constructors, yeah.
So, extending their lead, thanks to Bottas, Mercedes have got 362.5 points, and Red Bull have got 344.5 points. It's not very often we see the leader of the Irish Championship have a different constructor against their name from the leader of the Constructors' Championship. Usually it's just, Mercedes are winning, Lewis is winning, Red Bull are winning, Max is winning. But now we've got Max winning with a Mercedes constructor at the top. So it's all, each championship's spicing up quite a lot.
They need Perez, don't they? They need Perez to step
up. They really do. And in third place, retaking third place, knocking Ferrari out of that step with 215 points is McLaren Mercedes. Bravo, bravo. Ferrari with 201.5 points, and an Alpine with 95 points.
AlphaTauri on 84. They spoilt their run of points, didn't they? I think they've scored in every single race so far up to this point, and it was absolutely dreadful for them this week. So 84
Do you know who
points
else is Do you know who else has ruined their streak of finishing races? Lewis Hamilton in 65 races. Sorry, he's finished.
Really?
This is the first time. It's incredible, right?
Yeah, he is. He's nothing if not consistent. You have to, that's how he's got where he is.
Yep.
Aston Martin, 59 points. I can't see them being any higher than 7th by the end of the season. I don't think it's looking too good for them, to be honest. They have a car that doesn't seem to have any strengths. It's like not terrible, but it's not particularly great at anything. So it's not going too well for them. Williams, 22 points. That seems like a pretty solid P8 in the constructors right now, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So let's see if that could possibly change. It doesn't seem all that likely, but as the great Mario Walker used to say, anything can happen in Formula One, and it usually does. Alfa Romeo with 3 points still in P9, and Haas with nothing. So the bottom likely to stay. The bottom 4 likely to stay the same way for the rest of the season, I'd bet.
Yeah. Yeah, the top 3 or the top 4 is very interesting. Very interesting indeed.
Wow. We made it. We've managed to condense that down as much as we can. We knew when we started it was going to be a heavy one because obviously a lot to talk about. But thank you for spending the time with us, and we thoroughly enjoyed this episode. And do send us your thoughts and questions to us at RacePerMinute on Twitter. You can also get in touch at raceperminute.com. You can comment below if you're watching this on YouTube. And if you really enjoyed this episode, you can give us a rating or a like wherever you're watching or listening to it. If you really like what we do, then please consider hitting the subscribe button, get your episodes straight to you whenever we release them. And also it helps with all the algorithms and tells the mysterious computing powers that be that we're something that other people should listen to and watch as well. So that all helps. And if you really want to support the show and help keep all the quality content coming, then for as little as £1 a month, you can support us on Patreon at patreon.com/raceperminute. Get your hand on some lovely rewards. Watch the races and other sessions with us on Discord. All sorts of bits on there. Merchandise. And of course, get your name at the start of our videos and on our website and the like. It all helps keep us going. Obviously, it's not free to put this all together. We're happy to put our time and money into doing this, but if you want to support us, that's the best way to do it. All right, that's all the housekeeping done and dusted, Shane. Russia next. It's the last time we're going to Sochi. They're going to replace it with a track near St. Petersburg, I believe, which I don't think we really know much about. But thinking ahead to Sochi, it's been a really good season. Do you think it's possible we saw a good race in France? We saw a good race at Paul Ricard, and we saw an all right race at Monaco. Could we see an all right race at Sochi, Shane?
I think we might be in for a treat with the grid penalty which Max has had. Red Bull might jump on it and decide to put a new engine in the back of his motor, and because of that, Mercedes might think it's the perfect time to put a new engine in the back of Lewis Hamilton's car to maximise the distance for the season. So we could end up with the 2 championship contenders starting from the back of the grid, almost a reverse grid, charging their way through for Bottas to go in and win it for the last time because it's one of his favourite circuits. So who knows what's going to happen? It's Russia. I reckon it's going to be a good one. I got this feeling it's going to be a good one.
Fingers crossed. It'd be nice to see just one decent race
before it goes.
Sochi, before it goes. Yeah, exactly. So fingers crossed. Either way, we hope to see you there, and do join us for the podcast. And thanks very much. We'll see you next time.
See you next time.